Book 3, Part 8, Chapter 9. "Someone's here again," I said, sitting up and looking at the bedroom door, hearing the front door shut. We had heard Cal come in earlier, but they had kept things quiet after that. Rock shrugged, his eyes still on the small screen that was propped on his legs. I sighed and sat up more. Why do I always have to leave the room when you guys talk? He looked at me then, grinning. I wanted to smack him for it. "It's not funny," I huffed, scooting to the edge of the bed. "It has to do with me, so why can't I know?" When I stood up, he moved the DVD player and got up too. "Who says they're talking about you?" he chuckled. I gave him a look and he shrugged again. "We do talk about other things, you know." My eyes rolled and I took a few steps towards the door. Maybe I could hear something if I was a bit closer. I yelped when he jumped in front of me, blocking my way. "Move!" I whispered and tried to shove him. But we call him Rock for a reason. I grunted and went to walk around him, my eyes fixed on the door and my ears trying to make out the sounds in the other room. "That's called eavesdropping," he stated, louder than he had to. I growled. He was trying to warn them. That only got my interest more. What was the big secret? He grabbed me around the waist and picked me up, spinning me. I gasped and he laughed, but I knew he was just trying to distract me. I should have pretended I was sleepy, then he would have left me alone in here. It was hard trying to be sneaky with a massive werewolf trying to stop me. When he put me down, I was further from the door. I smiled at him and he shrugged. "Fine. I don't really care what they're talking about." "Liar," he laughed, watching me closely. Seems I was going to have to work on that. I put my hands on my hips and sighed. They've been talking for a long time. Just then the door opened and we both turned. I smiled when Phil walked in, dressed in jeans and a white thermal shirt. He still had the boots on, and I inhaled slowly. His scent, mixed with the woods, made my skin prickle, in a good way. Track walked in behind him, and I blinked. He chuckled, and then gave Rock one of those looks that annoyed me. Rock frowned and headed out into the main room. Track shut the door, and I watched him and Phil fidget a bit as they stood in front of me. My head tilted, and Phil looked at the bed. "Why don't we sit down?" I followed them both over, and I sat at the head of the bed, crossing my legs in front of me. Phil sat on the edge closest to me, his feet hanging over the side. Track crawled up and leaned back against the wall. "Okay, what's going on?" I asked, trying to smile. Phil glanced at Track, then back at me. "We want to talk to you about the holes in your memory." I lifted my hand and rubbed my forehead at the mention of it. Track chuckled, and I looked at him. I could sense their anxiety, and I lowered my hand, laying it in my lap. "Do you remember why we're here?" Phil asked. I frowned. "Of course I do." Track leaned forward. "Then why are we here?" I opened my mouth, froze for a second, and then shut it. Truth was, I couldn't remember why. The room fell quiet when I tried to chew through the holes. "We're here because," I started, thinking maybe if I just opened my mouth it would come out. But nothing popped into my mind. I glanced around the room. We were in a log cabin. I saw my duffel bag on a chest at the end of my bed. I looked across the room and saw the other bed, neatly made, with a similar bag at the end of it. I bit my lower lip. Vacation? The word came out in a small whisper, and Phil's head dropped. I stiffened. I mean... Track leaned over and shook his head, his eyes sad. We aren't on vacation, Ray. My eyes watered and I stared at him, pleading with him. He frowned. Do you remember your dad? Phil tensed then, and I sat up straight. Of course I do. What kind of question is that? Who is he? Okay, this was going a bit too far. Who's my dad? I nearly growled, ready to knock them both off the bed for whatever game they were playing. Track only nodded and Phil watched me. I pursed my lips. You know very well who my dad is, Track. Then tell me. Tell me your dad's name, Ray. There was a pleading in his voice that confused me. My head whipped around to Phil, and I was shocked to see such sadness in those beautiful brown eyes. Why was he going along with Track's ridiculous game? Ray? I frowned, still watching Phil, who didn't move, and didn't tell my best friend to knock it off. I shook my head slightly, and Phil gave a small nod back. What is... I remember the question, I snapped, turning back to Track. I just don't understand why you're asking it. Track sat up, looking at me hard. Tell me what your dad's name is. I couldn't believe this was happening. Phil wasn't laughing. Track wasn't smiling. And yet this was so idiotic I didn't know how to react. When he leaned forward again, I growled, lowering my chin in a warning. I know this sounds crazy, Ray, but you need to answer the question. Crazy? This was past crazy. I leaned closer to him, so our noses were only an inch apart. Thomas Blvd, I hissed, the anger pumping through me. Track nodded. And why are we here? I growled again, still nose to nose with him. We're here because you kidnapped me, I shot out. You kidnapped me because my dad freaked out about... Then my eyes shot open wide and Track smiled. I sat back, stunned, as the floodgates opened in my mind. About me and you, I whispered, turning and looking at Phil. His eyes were moist now, and he gave me a small nod. I blinked hard and looked around the room again. Owl saw, I whispered, and then climbed off the bed. Track followed me, but Phil stayed where he was. The sensation was amazing. It was like a rush of images and feelings crashed down on me and then swirled. I smiled and then shivered, looking at Track. My dad took me out of the manor. Track nodded and I turned, putting one hand on my stomach. He wouldn't listen. Again I looked over to where Phil sat. He thought you guys did something to me, so he took me away. My dad, his face swam in my mind, and my heart ached a little. I missed him. I knew he only did it because he loved me. He didn't understand and wanted to keep me safe. I smiled, remembering his laugh. Track moved into my line of sight again, and I jumped a bit. Oh, my dad! He had to be completely freaked by now. How long had we been here? I couldn't remember exactly. I need to call him, I gasped, looking around for my phone. Slow it down, Track smiled, putting his hands up. He knows you're with us. I chuckled and he shrugged. Okay, so he isn't happy about it, but he knows. Phil stood and I turned. Why did he look so sad? This was great. I remember now, Phil, I beamed, walking over to him. I can talk to my dad, explain everything to him. Why wasn't he as excited as I was? I took his hand and bounced a little. It'll take some time to get through to him, but he'll come around. I know he will. Phil turned and looked at Track, and I turned as well. Ray, there's more to all of this, he said, walking over to us. Details, I huffed playfully, still smiling. This felt good. The memories were flooding back in, and it was like waking from a very long dream. My mind stretched and let more in. I giggled, then put my other hand on my side. The buck. I let go of Phil's hand and lifted my shirt a little. No scar, no sign, but I remembered it. I grinned and lowered my shirt. Then I turned and rushed out of the room before either of them could react. Ryan and the guys jumped to their feet, and I looked around the room. I remember now. I need my phone. I have to call my dad and explain this to him before he does something crazy, I shrugged at the end, and then headed towards the coats that hung on the wall. As I rummaged through my ghastly red coat, Ryan stepped up to me while Track and Phil talked to the others behind me. Reina, we need to talk to you before you contact him. I pulled my hand out of the last pocket and shook my head. The longer we wait, the madder he's going to get. I know my dad. I chuckled at the end and looked at Ryan. I don't have my phone with me, do I? He shook his head and I nodded. I was always forgetting that thing somewhere. Can I use yours? Ryan sighed. Yes, once we've had a chance to talk. I felt the stares and turned. The guys were huddled together with Track and Phil in the center. None of them were smiling. I frowned. Why is everyone looking like that? I can remember now. I looked back at my alpha. Isn't that what you wanted me to do? Yes. Then I don't understand. That's because you think you remember everything now, Track said, walking over to me. Think? He nodded and I bit my lower lip. What else was there to remember? My dad had taken me out of the manor when he found out about Phil and I bonding. Understandable if you knew my dad. The guys had snatched me to tell me their side. I knew that side now. I knew the truth. So, all I had to do was explain it to my dad. No easy task, I get that, but he would come around. Do you remember where we took you from? I blinked and looked up at Ryan, his brown eyes watching me. I felt his anxiety and wrinkled my brows in thought. Yes, I was at... More memories swam in. Aunt Mary's, I exclaimed triumphantly. Wow, it felt good to remember. I chuckled then. You drugged them to get me out. My head tilted a bit and I shrugged. It's okay. I can smooth that over too. Then I turned and looked at Phil. It's their own fault. Well, my dad's. I reached my arm out and Phil stepped up, taking my hand. I gave his a soft squeeze. He should have known better than to think hiding me could keep us apart. Reina? I kept Phil's hand when I turned and looked back up at my alpha. Who was at Aunt Mary's with you? What was it with the odd questions? Michael? Aunt Mary? Okay, yikes. Drugging my bodyguard was one thing, but sweet Aunt Mary? That might be a little hard to get them to forgive, but it was doable. She would completely understand once I explained how much Phil and I loved each other. That thought made me smile again. Who else was there? Track prompted, and I shrugged. Martin? I can't remember if the wolf guards were in or out. I tilted my head more and frowned as I tried to remember if anyone else was there. I finally shook my head, which made Phil and Track sigh. Why does it matter who was there? I asked quietly, looking at Phil, then Track, and finally back at Ryan when the other two didn't respond. There was one other person there, he stated. I shrugged. Okay, who? And why does it even matter? That is what I need you to remember, my alpha stated quietly, his eyes soft with sadness and worry. I looked back at Phil, but my mind was replaying the day they were talking about. I was at Aunt Mary's. I could picture her expensive and surprisingly modern apartment. Michael and Martin with their security stations set up near the elevator. I sighed as I remembered a delivery being brought up, then chuckled as I recalled my guards going through them like there might be a bomb. Guess there was, just not the kind they were looking for, I thought, smiling. You had to admit, my pack was pretty amazing to get whatever they knocked us all out with past those guys. Finally I sighed. I just don't know. Maybe some of her house help? I was grasping now. I knew my dad wasn't there. Most of the planet wouldn't be standing if they had drugged him. When they all waited, I frowned, feeling like a kid in front of the class that didn't know the answers to a test question. Allison? I tried. Track shook his head. Phil was looking a bit pale, and I put my hand on his cheek. I don't know why this matters so much, I whispered. He closed his eyes and put a hand over mine, inhaling slowly. I smiled and moved closer to him. Then Ryan cleared his throat. Phil's eyes opened, and he pulled my hand down, but kept it in his. Reina, do you remember where you were before Aunt Mary's? Now that was a good question. I squinted as I tried to remember. I remember Allison and I went to town, to a bookstore. Who went with you? Track asked, his voice so low and strained with emotions. Michael, Martin, Allison. I wrinkled my nose as I tried to remember sitting in the car. Finally, I shook my head. No one else, I guess. Rock groaned from behind, and I huffed. What? Is that the wrong answer? This was starting to get on my nerves. If they wanted a different answer, why didn't they just tell me? Look, I snapped at Rock, since there was no way I was talking to Ryan that way. That's all I remember. If someone else was there, then either I don't remember or they don't matter. So, I don't remember, I growled and then shook myself. Why did you go to the bookstore? It was Phil that asked this question, and I frowned. Okay, I was done. I pulled my hand out of his and turned to try to face them all. I have no idea what you want me to say, and I don't understand what you're trying to get at. I flinched a bit when Ryan took a step closer, but like I said, I was done. I went to town with Allison. My breath caught and I stiffened. Wait, it wasn't Allison. It was Paige. Her image came to me and I felt a pang of guilt for not remembering her. My hand shook a bit now, so I crossed my arms in front of me. She wanted to go pick up a book, so we went into town to get it. There. That better make them happy now. Maybe they knew it wasn't Allison. If so, then this should be what they were looking for. The room was quiet, and I looked through the faces, except for Ryan's. I was too chicken to turn on him with a hard look. Finally, I threw my hands up. What? That's it. It was Paige. Now my blood was starting to boil. She got a text To come get a book, I snarled at Track. You sent the text. You should know. He gave a small nod and I frowned. So we went to the bookstore. The memories became clearer and I remembered leaning over and reading the text, knowing it was from my best friend. When we got to the store, I had to pretend to be looking at the girly books so that Michael and Jonathan wouldn't figure out what we were doing. Now the silence was thick with the smell of my packmates and Alpha. Their hearts were racing, and I shook my head trying to figure out why. What had I said? I replayed the statement. I had to be careful at the bookstore. That was a no-brainer. Michael and Jonathan would have... I blinked several times as another face came alive in my mind. Then I gasped, turning to look at Phil. Jonathan. I blinked a few more times. Jonathan Hilvar. He was... I was... We were... I moaned, and everything started to spin. My heart raced so fast and hard that I felt it in my ears. We better sit her down, Track whispered, but I put out my hands and shook my head. The memories were slamming into me now, and not just into my mind. My heart squeezed so tight I thought I would die, and then it pounded hard against my chest. I was in love with Jonathan. I put one hand to my forehead and turned, leaning the other on the back of the wood door to steady myself. Reina, talk it out, Ryan whispered, but I couldn't. My words were being strangled in my throat. I felt it burn and turned away from all of them. What did they think of me? What kind of person was I? Jonathan, my Jonathan. How could I have forgotten him? They drugged you, I heard my dad whisper in my mind. Magic spells. Witches were also whispered, but I didn't know the voice. I shook my head hard. No, my pack would never do something like that to me. I loved Phil. What we had was real. I gave a small gasp and leaned harder on the door. Just then my legs started to tingle, but I barely noticed. Jonathan's face flashed in my mind. His beautiful smile. His gorgeous gray eyes. How could I have forgotten? I remembered him standing in the hall at the manor, talking through the wall while I hid in a room full of dust. He held me through all my first shifts, whispering into my ear. I felt the tears fall, but ignored them too. What kind of monster was I? Phil's face appeared in my thoughts, and my heart crushed. I loved him so much. I inhaled slowly and remembered his scent, and then took it in from where he stood. He was my soulmate, my true love. What had I done to deserve this? What was Jonathan going through right now? He must be worried. Did he know about me and Phil? How could I? What was wrong with me? I heard my name more than once, and I ignored it. Suddenly, I threw back my head and screamed as the pain in my legs shot through my entire body. No, not now, I yelled in my mind. But it was too late, and I was too stressed and overwhelmed to stop it. I heard the others yelling, and I thrashed out when they tried to come near me. I was a monster, a freak, evil, and they needed to stay away. I deserved this pain. My back arched and I screamed and screamed until it became a howl. Then I threw back my head and howled my pain to the air around me. Finally, I collapsed, keeping my eyes closed as my muscles twitched from such an intense shift. My chest rose and fell hard, and I panted deep and fast. I said, "Leave her be." My ears twitched as Ryan snapped at someone. I didn't turn my head. I didn't care. I was so consumed with guilt and self-loathing. Part of me wished the buck had had more time with me before. Then my ears twitched again, and I slowly opened one eye. Somehow, I was in the bedroom again, laying on the rug, the heat of the fire finding me as I realized it was there. When I turned my head a little, I saw the door that led to the main room. It was open a bit, and the voices of my packmates drifted in. Humiliation swam through me, and I turned my head, lifting it. I was alone in the room. That was pretty stupid on their part, and lucky on mine. I didn't deserve to be happy, and I was drowning everyone around me in my issues. How could they even look at me knowing what I had done? It must have been so hard for them to pretend. Now I knew why Phil acted the way he did. This stupid Aote forced him to love me, but he knew what kind of person I was and couldn't bring himself to love me completely. Who could blame him? I jumped up, looked around the room, squared my muscles, and lunged. The sound of smashing glass filled my ears, and the thick curtains tangled around me as I landed. They caught my legs, and I rolled when I fell, but I caught myself and jumped up quickly. I saw Will first, but he was several yards away. The yelling behind me shot adrenaline through me, and I ripped the material that tethered me. Without looking back, I sprang forward and shot off towards the trees. There was more yelling as I jumped over a pile of wood and ran into the darkness. I stretched my legs out, leaping and pounding the ground underneath. I had to get out of Ryan's alpha control before he could shift and force me back. My front paw sunk into a hole, and I yelped as my body was flung forward, but I jumped back up and ran harder, ignoring the slight pain in my leg. Jonathan's face popped into my mind, and I pushed it out. I couldn't think about that right now. I had to get far enough away first. Then I would sit and sort this all out. Something snapped to my right, but I only turned my ears. It was dark, and I needed my eyes focused on the woods ahead of me. I remembered the owl saw camp, and I was headed away from it, and away from the road we had taken to get there. They would be coming after me, and this was their territory. The only thing I had on my side was the time it took them to recover from the shock, and that wouldn't be much. I yelped as my shoulder hit a tree I hadn't seen. I was weaving in and out, but I was running in as much of a straight line as I could. There was no point trying to find water to cover my scent. I didn't know these woods, and I had to get far enough away that my alpha couldn't pull me back. I had to think, and I couldn't do it here. I saw a large dip ahead, and I ran harder, then leapt over it and lowered my head, my heart pounding in my chest. Phil's face popped into my mind, and I felt my heart squeeze. "No," I growled at myself as I jumped over a bush. "Focus." The trees were thicker here, and, as much as I didn't like it, I had to slow to a steady run. If I fell, they would gain, and I couldn't let that happen. Ouch! Another tree clipped my hip when I didn't twist fast enough. I growled again, angry that the brush was so dense now. My wolf eyes were having a hard time keeping up with my speed, and a lack of moonlight to help me see where I was going. Then my front leg fell forward, and the rest of me followed. I cried out as I tumbled down a hill, yelping as my jaw hit a large rock.
My legs flew out, trying to catch the ground, but I rolled several more times before I slowed enough. One hard shake, and I was off again, limping just a little. Great, just great. My ears were ringing a bit from the fall, and I tossed my head to clear it. Finally, the ground lightened a bit, the moon able to peek through. I picked up speed and ignored the throbbing in my jaw as I ran harder. It was my wolf nose that let me know I was on a straight path, the smells around me and the light of the moon when I could see it. My ears stayed alert and only caught the occasional deer, which only made my stomach growl at one point. The other creatures had run off and were hiding. Little did they know, they were the farthest thing from my mind. I followed the moon until my muscles started to ache, but I kept going. The ground was easier to see, and I avoided most of the traps the forest likes to hide in the shadows. My jaw was actually pretty sore now, and my throat was dry from panting. I could smell my sweat and the froth that was coating me. I needed water. Food I could wait for. Without water, my muscles would stop no matter what my mind told them to do. So I lifted my nose and inhaled deeply. Luckily, I smelled fresh water, and it wasn't off my path. 100 yards further, and I snorted. The water was close, and it was sizable. That meant water to drink, and I could even distract my scent. I picked up speed, my muscles arguing, but I pushed until I reached the bank of a small river. It was more like a very large creek, at least 4 yards wide. I trotted to the bank and looked down, able to see the pebbles and the dirt at the bottom. I lowered my head, keeping my ears alert, and drank. The cool water felt good on my throat and also on my legs. I took a few more steps in and let the cold wet me and cool me off. Now I couldn't make out the bottom, so the next step was soft and searching. I would feel for the bottom, place my paw carefully, and then lift the next. Halfway across, I heard something behind me. A branch snapped. My head shot up, and I plunged into the creek. The current was mild, but I followed it down a bit before stepping out. A quick shake, and I was off and running again. They could follow my scent. I would be crazy to think they couldn't. All I had was that small window of time. The forest thickened around me again, and I picked my way through it. I did have to stop to rub a thorn out of my back paw, and then again to wait for my head to clear when I tripped and whacked my jaw on a stump. Yeah, the very same spot. That was gonna hurt. Just when I thought this forest might win and beat me senseless, the trees started to thin. My adrenaline kicked up a bit, and I picked up some speed. Wow, they still hadn't found me, I thought, a bit impressed. I figured I only had a good 3 minutes head start. That would give them time to recover from the shock of me jumping through the window, then time for them to shift, and then orders from Ryan. Yeah, 3 if I was lucky. Most of them were faster than me on 4 legs. And the Alisal wolves, well, this was their territory. Doubt started to creep in, and I slowed without realizing it, then stole a look behind me. Not that I wanted to be caught, but why hadn't they found me yet? I wasn't that good. I finally snorted, mad that I was wasting my time wondering how I got lucky, and put more speed into my aching legs. The trees thinned again, and I turned my head side to side to watch the landscape changing. More bushes than trees now, and the grass was getting thicker. The moon was high above and lit up the night for my wolf eyes. I trotted down another steep hill, this one softer and more open, but I wasn't taking any chances of falling again. When I got near the bottom, I froze. A howl filled the air but was cut short. Crap! I turned and ran, away from the howl and towards the smells that twisted my stomach, and not from hunger. My mind flinched, waiting for Ryan to mentally slap me and pin me to the ground until they could get to me. I forced more speed out of my muscles, ignoring their warnings. I had to get farther away. The trees were scarcer now, and even the bushes were fading into open grass fields. I did spot several fences, and I could smell the food that grew behind them. Owl saw crops? I hoped that's what they were. I ran up a steep hill, seeing other rows of fences following me up. Who planted crops on a hill? At the top, I slid to another stop. I could see down the hill and could hear the things I saw moving. Cows and sheep shifted uneasily, probably sensing me. My ears perked up as I watched them huddle together in their large pens below me. My mouth watered, and they got loud, calling out warnings to each other. I growled, "Great. Might as well send up a flare." Then something else caught my eyes, and I looked past them. Lights. A town. Far off in the distance. My heart sped up, and my body shook. The sheep brayed louder now, running into each other as they tried to find some way to hide from me. But they were the last thing on my mind right now. Another sound shocked me, and I turned. It was a motorcycle, and it was headed this way. I growled and ran down the hill towards the animals that were now frantically trying to flee. I turned when I got to the fence and ran along it, the sheep trampling each other on the other side. I lowered my head and ran harder, the pain coming back and shooting through my entire body. Finally, the fence ended, and I turned and ran again, leaving the noisy marker behind me. Then I heard a sound again. The motorcycle was on my path, and it was gaining. I looked to both sides, trying to figure out what to do. There was nothing but open fields as far as I could see. Crap! I lowered my head and ran even harder, straight towards those lights. The buzzing of the motorcycle followed me, and then I saw something that made my stomach clench. A large fence stood between me and a road that I saw through the wood poles. Normally a fence wouldn't bother a werewolf, but this one seemed made for them. It was at least 8 feet high. The logs laid on top of each other, and their ends were set into large stone blocks. There wasn't enough room to squeeze through. We were bigger than a normal wolf. I looked to each side, trying to determine if one way might lead to an opening, or at least a shorter part that I could jump. 8 feet wasn't so bad, I told myself. I had jumped that height before, but my body was taxed, and I didn't know if my muscles could handle it. I heard the motorcycle rev up. It was closer now. Guess we'll have to see how much juice I still have, I thought. Plus, there was only one thing I was sure of. There was no way that motorcycle could get over that fence. That made up my mind, and I slowed my run just a bit. I had to catch my breath and also focus on my target. About 100 yards away, I picked up speed again, lowered my head, and ran. My muscles screamed out in protest, but I ignored them. This was the only way. The motorcycle was getting closer now, and I could actually hear someone yelling. Crap! I didn't recognize the voice right away and pushed my exhausted body harder. The fence was getting closer, and I started to realize it was higher than I thought. Reina, stop! My ears perked up. It was Cal. I slammed the ground under me and forced more from my legs. You can't make that jump, he yelled. Dang, he was getting close. My wolf ears could pick up sound farther than most, but even still, he was too close. A few more yards and I started to adjust my gait, mentally planning out how many I had left until the jump, so that I didn't have to stall, or worse, turn back around and try again. Cal kept yelling at me to stop, knowing I could hear him, but I focused on the fence and then pushed with everything I had. I caught air and flung my body forward, watching the top of that fence. When I got close, I gasped. I wasn't going to make it. Sure enough, I cried out as my front half barely hit the top and the rest of me slammed into the logs. Pain seared through my chest and back legs. Then I started to slip. Instinct took over and my front paws clawed at the top logs while my back ones clawed at the side. My back ones got traction, good thing for thick, sharp werewolf claws. I scrambled up more until I was hanging over. My stomach did a double take as I now looked down the other side. No bushes to break my fall. In fact, the ground was even farther away on this side. A large trench dug along it to make scaling it even harder. Crap. There was a short strip of grass past that, and then concrete road. I would have to push off and try to jump far enough out to hit the other side of that trench, which meant, "Reina, stop! Don't move! I'll help you." Track had made jumps a lot higher than this hundreds of times. He jumped out my third-story window all of the time. The manor, visions rushed through my mind, of my home. Then Jonathan's face sprang up in my mind. I growled in self-hate, turned my head, and yelped, having to dig my claws into the wood to keep my balance. Cal was off the bike now, looking up at me. His eyes were wide and he had both hands out. "Stay still, I'll get you down." With that, I turned and jumped, pushing off from the fence. "No!" was all I could hear as the ground rushed up at me. I think it was Cal yelling, but it might have been me for all I know. And then I hit. Hard. So much for cat-like reflexes. I did manage to hit the far side of the trench, but barely. The ground was also soft here, which threw me off balance. I yelped, cried out, and then I think I screamed as my front paws landed first and buckled under my weight, slamming me head first onto the asphalt road. My back end flipped over my head and then threw the rest of me with it. I don't know how many times I rolled or how many times I hit my head, but everything went gray towards the end. Finally, mercifully, my body lost its momentum and I flopped like a rag doll and laid there, gasping for breath, in the middle of the road. My body was in a pile, my legs twisted, and my head buried under my side. For a minute, I thought I heard birds singing somewhere far away. I remembered the phrase, "seeing stars," and now completely understood what they meant. Wow, the pain was intense, and my head swam from the impact of the road. My neck was on fire, and the birds flew out and left bells ringing in my ears. I yelped several times as I slowly untangled myself from myself. I was laying on my side now, completely stretched out and gasping for air. Then I heard Cal's voice. He was yelling, but not at me. I give up, I thought. My body wouldn't move if I wanted it to. Just to prove its point, I tried to lift my head, and couldn't. Great. Just great. I tried to run off, managed to beat myself senseless, and now I was lying here in the road, hoping they would hurry up and rescue me. Was there a word worse than idiot? Yeah, there was, but I didn't even care about that right now. My front leg was hot and throbbing hard. My forehead was worse, and I smelled blood, my own blood. I laid there, head spinning and ears still ringing. I was mentally beating myself up and still waiting for my rescue team. What was taking them so long? All I wanted now was to be taken somewhere to sleep off this horrible pain. I was in trouble, I knew that, but I just didn't care. Whatever it was, I deserved it. Then I heard a sound that sent another wave of panic through me. A horn. A large, deep, monstrous horn. Seems the high-pitched bells in my ears had changed to baritones. I closed my eyes and watched the darkness spin madly from behind closed lids. "Reina, you have to get up," Cal was yelling behind me. Get up? Was he serious? Why wasn't he here helping me? Then I heard a string of words that would have made Track proud. The foghorn bellowed in my head again, and I blinked my eyes open. It didn't seem to be coming from the same place the bells and birds had. I tried to lift my head and felt my stomach turn. Then I caught something down the road, and I squinted. Were those headlights? Crap! It wasn't in my head. It was a truck. A big truck, and it was headed this way. Crap! I forced my head up and turned. Through the slots I could see Cal scaling the fence. Wow, it was a lot higher than I thought. I blinked as he looked at me. "You've got to get off the road," he screamed. I pulled my front leg under me and tried to push up on it. It gave out, and my head fell forward. This time, the side above my eye cracked on the concrete. Ouch! The lights were getting closer now, and my head started to pound. Cal was over the top, and he jumped down easily, then hurdled the trench and ran over to me. Show off, I thought as he knelt next to me. His hair was wet with sweat, and his face was red as he bent over and started to scoop me up in his arms. I could see the outline of that massive truck now. The rings of lights were blurry, and my mouth was going dry. Then something exploded, and Cal, with me in his arms, flew through the air and landed hard on the other side of the road. I screamed out from the pain as we landed and rolled several times, the wind whooshing over us as the truck passed. He was on top of me now, covering my body protectively with his. Then I felt the rumble and roar of the truck as it went further down the road. Cal climbed off of me, kneeling next to me. I laid my head on the ground and was still. I couldn't have moved anything if I wanted to, and the shock of what just happened was fighting with the pain for my attention. My head was the worst of all, and that was saying something. "She's all right," he yelled, but I only moved my ears as I heard people and wolves running. Great. Wonder if I could screw up things any more. I moaned. Better not test that one. I heard voices and barks around me and closed my eyes. "She's okay. I got her off the road in time," Cal explained, panting hard himself. "Why did you have to get her off the road?" Ugh. That was Phil's voice. "She jumped the fence and..." "That fence?" That was Jackson now. "She jumped that?" A long string of cursing, and then, "That fence is 15 feet tall." Yikes. Okay, so I really did underestimate it. "Actually, it's closer to 20, came a voice I vaguely remembered. One of Cal's clique, I think. Phil knelt in front of me, and I yelped when he put his hand on my side, causing him to pull his hand away quickly.
"Get the truck over here, now," he yelled. "You're safe now," he said, in a much softer voice, kneeling closer to my head. I opened my eyes and blinked through the pain, looking up at him. His face was red too, sweat dripped down his temples, but his eyes smiled at me, and I moaned, the guilt mixing with the pain. More feet appeared, and then a few sets of furry legs. Ryan lowered his muzzle, and I whimpered. "Let's get you back," was all he said, and then lifted his head, his eyes surveying my body. Track nuzzled me, and I winced. "You have more lives than a cat, but you jump like a girl," he thought, and I chuckled, which made me yelp. My sides were sore. "We have company," somebody else shouted, and then I heard another truck approaching. It wasn't a semi-truck, though, and I was surrounded by my pack. I laid my head down and waited. Man, did my head hurt. I heard the truck slow down and then stop. "Is everyone okay?" came a strange voice. Then something hit my nose, and my eyes shot open. Phil laid his hand on my jaw, a very sore part of my jaw, and I yelped, but he didn't move it. "Yeah, we're fine," I heard Will say. His voice was moving towards the road. I ignored the pressure on my sore jaw, too aroused by the smell. Humans, I thought, my ears picking up, and I pushed against Phil's hand, trying to look up. He held me down. "Steady," he whispered. Then I heard a door open. "Looks like you had yourself an accident." It was a man's voice. He seemed older, and I inhaled. He was completely human. The smell was nearly intoxicating, and I whimpered, again trying to lift my head. The human whistled. "How'd you go and run through that fence?" "Oh, Dad, they have a dog. They hit a dog." Suddenly, my senses went into overload, and I bunched up all my muscles trying to get up. That was a female's voice, a human female. Phil put his other hand on my back hip. "Ouch! Okay, that hurt." "Be still, Reina," he whispered. "It's our dog. We're taking her back home," Will stated. I could hear the frustration hidden in his voice. Another door opened. "Oh, the poor thing. How bad is it?" "Not to worry." It was Jackson talking now. "She'll be fine. In a few days," he added with a chuckle. He was over by the humans now, too, and I growled. Did you hit the dog?" came the mousy little voice that tickled the inside of my ears. I tried to swat at them, but something else was holding my legs now. "Dad, maybe you should take a look. My dad had a dog that—" "We're fine, but we appreciate the offer," Will stated. He was smiling, I could tell, but my wolf ears heard so much more. Humans were trouble, and he wanted them gone. "You sure? I'd be happy to take a look," the man said. "Had two dogs hit myself. One lived a long life with a limp. The other," he clucked his tongue. "So, what happened with that fence?" "We were chasing poachers," Will explained. "They were after our stock, and we ran 'em this way. She was chasing 'em, too. We thought we cornered 'em, but seems they had something else in mind." "Poachers!" the girl gasped, and I could tell she was hamming it up a bit. How could I tell? Especially with my head swimming, and the rest of me in pain? A girl just knows. "We get 'em now and then," Cal put in. She actually giggled then, and I moaned. Her scent was drifting towards me, and my heartbeat raced a bit. "You must be very brave to be chasing poachers." Her voice dipped just a bit, and I pictured Alyssa, with one of her shoulders forward, making those eyes at the guys. Seemed it was a talent that ran in all races of females. Cal chuckled, but I could hear the frustration under his laugh.
"Wow," came another gasp from the human girl. "That's a really big dog." Her voice had gotten closer, and Phil gave a low growl, leaning over me to block part of me. Jackson cussed under his breath. "Yeah, she's part wolf," he stated. I pulled back my lips to growl. Dang, even that hurt. "Dad, you should see how big this dog is. He's the biggest dog. I've never seen a dog that big." "Get them out of here, now." It was Ryan's voice that I heard, but he was in wolf form, hiding offline in the tree line with the others that had shifted. "Ryan says to get them out of here," I stated in my mind, and Phil nodded. "We're trying." By the looks of that fence, it had to have been a big rig that hit her. There's a lot of damage. Surprised the truck made it off. "The fence can be fixed," Will stated. "It's my dog I'm concerned about. I appreciate you stopping, but we need to get her home now." "Hybrid, huh?" the human man stated, and the whole area went still and quiet. I fought against Phil's hands, but he won. How did a human know about hybrids? "No wonder you're attached to her. Wolf dogs are as smart as they come." The man gave a soft chuckle. "Had one that was 1/4 wolf myself. Never did see a smarter dog." I let out my breath, and so did those around me. "But Dad, that dog is really, really big." "Lisa, get in the truck. These folks have enough to worry about and don't need you gawking at their dog." She let out a huff, and my whole body trembled. I tried to get up again, but the hands kept me where I was. I wanted to see them, smell them. I was fascinated and excited by their scent. Humans so close, and I couldn't even get a look at them. I heard the female whine, but they both got in the truck. Will thanked them again, and then the truck drove off and took their amazing scent with them. I snorted and stopped fighting against the hands. "We have to lift you into the truck," Phil explained, and I gave a small nod. I didn't care. The fight was completely gone, and the exciting distraction just drove off. I wanted them to take me back. I wanted to be in that cabin, laying on a soft bed. I would take whatever punishment they had waiting, as long as the pain would just stop. And with that, that's where I'm going to stop.